Officials say 14 people have died, with Israel being widely blamed. It comes after at least 12 people were killed and thousands hurt when pagers blew up across the country yesterday. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby says they don't want to see any escalation.
We don't believe that the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations at all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy.
Train drivers with the ASLEF union have voted overwhelmingly to accept a multi-year pay deal. The government says the agreement is an important step in getting the country moving again. Well, LBC's Henry Riley has more on this.
This multi-year agreement brings to an end more than 2 years of strike action on the railways in England, Scotland and Wales. The package was agreed by union officials and the government back in August, but it's now been backed in a vote, with 96.6% of ASLEF members voting in favour. The union represents 21,000 railway workers, mostly train drivers. They say the agreement equates to a 15% rise over 3 years.
The Health Secretary is warning the NHS will die if it's not reformed. Wes Streeting says the approach to public health also needs to change. He's told LBC this evening that Labour are being bold on the service.
One of the reasons I said on day one the NHS is broken is that if you are honest about the challenge, you've then got half a chance of fixing it. When you have a culture of cover-up to protect either political reputations or organisational reputations, that's where the patient safety risk kicks in.
The Metropolitan Police has referred itself to the watchdog after an actor was pepper-sprayed as he was wrongly arrested. Reese Richards says he was racially profiled by officers. And the UK operator of TGI Fridays has gone into administration, putting thousands of jobs at risk. Hostmore hopes to sell the chain of 87 restaurants by the end of the month. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 56 points at 82.53. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.18. LBC weather staying dry tonight with some low cloud moving in from the east for most, clearer in the far west and parts of northern Scotland, and a low of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 6 minutes past 9 is the time here on LBC. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. Last night in this hour, we talked to Tom Tugendhat, one of the 4 remaining Conservative Party leadership contenders. Tonight, we are with James Cleverly. So if you'd like to ask him a question, you can do so on 0345 6060 973. James, welcome. Is it possible to enjoy a leadership election campaign?
To an extent. I'm a bit of a weird creature. I think all of us in politics are to an extent. I like meeting the grassroots of the party. I like doing the campaigning stuff. I enjoyed it when I was party chairman during the 2019 general election. And I kind of even enjoyed it to an extent during the most recent general election, even though...
To an extent.
Well, to an extent.
Nice caveat.
Well, in 2019, I was enjoying it because I could see that we were going to do well, and we did very well. We got that 80-seat majority. In this election, I could see we weren't going to do so well, so that took some of the edge off of the enjoyment. But I like it. I like meeting people. I like talking to people. I like getting out and about. So I'm a bit weird like that.
What have you learnt about yourself from the various jobs that you've held in government? And I mentioned the 2 most senior ones, but you've had several others as well. How different do you feel you are as a person, as a politician, from when you first entered Parliament?
Massively. And I joined the Reserve Forces. I went to Sandhurst. I did the Reserve Forces course at Sandhurst, and you're taught about leadership, you're taught about decision making, and you're taught these things slightly in the abstract. And you go through life, and everything that you experience in life shapes you a bit. And I now look at how I make decisions, how I think, how I act, how I deal with officials, how I deal with setbacks. And I compare myself to when I was first elected to the version of me now that's been through, as I say, running the party during a general election as chairman of the party, running the Foreign Office during our really challenging circumstances with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I was Foreign Secretary when Hamas put in the brutal attacks into Israel, when we did the evacuation from Sudan. I've been Home Secretary, where you do literally get the phone calls in the middle of the night from counter-terrorism police and the security services asking you to make decisions, and that shapes you, and it does change you. And I look at the version of myself now compared even to the version of myself from 3-4 years ago before I held those big jobs, and you do change massively. I like to think I've changed for the better. I think I prioritise much better than I used to, and and it's been a privilege to serve. But it does shape you.
And the experiences that you've had, I mean, I said in the introduction there that you are the most experienced of the 4 candidates, but that can also be a double-edged sword, can't it? Because whenever there's a leadership election, there's a school of thought, well, sort of, let's have the most experience and that's probably the case, what you want when you're in government. But there's also a school of thought that says, no, we need someone fresh, who's brand new, who hasn't been sort of tainted with the record of the previous administration. And that's presumably subtly where your opponents are trying to attack you. I mean, how do you address that?
Well, look, we've all been in government. So if you want someone that's a completely clean pair of heels, none of us can offer that. But I'm not convinced that... when I was knocking on doors at the general election, no one said, you know what, James, I would vote Conservative if you lot had less experience. I would vote Conservative if there was someone completely new running the organisation. That's not what they were saying. What they were saying was the opposite. They wanted delivery, and that doesn't come from a lack of experience. That comes from experience. They wanted us to be as good as our word. They wanted us to prove to them that we were serious about government and about their needs. At no point did anyone say to me, actually, you know what, I just want to see a completely new and fresh face. And look, this is particularly true if you look where we lost votes. We lost votes to Reform, and we lost votes to the Liberal Democrats. And a load of Conservatives stayed at home as well. Reform is run by someone that's been on the political scene for decades. The Liberal Democrats are run by someone that's been on the political scene for decades. So if the British voters wanted a fresh face, they didn't demonstrate that in how they voted at the general election. They were very frustrated with us because I think our behaviour was not up to scratch. And actually, we had overpromised and under-delivered. And I think, and this is the sales pitch I've been making around the country, when the British people say to you, we are going to punish you because you've overpromised and under-delivered, the way to respond to that is to do the opposite of what we did, which is, in the future, we need to promise less. And I know that sounds counterintuitive when you're trying to inspire people, but we should promise less, but make sure we deliver on all our promises. I think if we can demonstrate we do that through local government, where our local government base is incredibly important, and how we manage ourselves as a political party, I think we'll win back the support from people that drifted off to Reform, drifted off to Lib Dems, and those that stayed at home. And the 7 or 8 people that went off to Labour.
What's your backstory, and where do you come from? Because I think we've had a succession of fairly well-off or posh prime ministers over possibly Liz Truss being an exception, but David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. We kind of know all their backgrounds, but tell our listeners a bit about your own background.
Well, look, So I was in one way, I was very, very lucky. I was born and brought up by loving parents in a stable, extended family environment. So I was born in Lewisham Hospital. My dad was a small businessman, a surveyor by profession, ran an estate agency business in southeast London. My mother came from Sierra Leone in West Africa, and I think everyone likes to define themselves as working class. Even upper class people like to put on a bit of mockney every now and then. Look, I am completely middle class. I am boringly middle class. My mum was a midwife. My dad was a surveyor. I went to a fee-paying school in southeast London because my mum from West Africa thought education was the single most important thing that you could provide for your children after, shelter and food. But my parents started paying for my education whilst they still lived in the spare bedroom of my grandparents' house in Catford. I'm an only child because they couldn't afford 2 sets of school fees. And, I'm a child of that Thatcherite era. My dad started a business under Margaret Thatcher, which grew and became successful, and I had a comfortable but not particularly privileged upbringing.
I remember seeing the pictures of you when you went to Sierra Leone as Foreign Secretary. What did that mean to you?
That was something else. So we flew into Lunga Airport, which is just over the harbour from Freetown, and I wanted to go to Bow, which is where my mother was from, where she had initially trained as a nurse, and I wanted to look at some of the projects that the UK had supported in Bow. And it happens to be the case that the president is also from Bow, which is Sierra Leone's kind of second city, although city is a generous term for that. But it's quite a long drive. It's about a 3-hour drive. And as we came to the outskirts of Bow, the advance team from the embassy were saying, there's a guy on a motorbike wearing a T-shirt with your face on it, Foreign Secretary. And I thought, that's a bit random. And then had another message saying, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's quite a few of them. And unbeknownst to me, all the little kind of motorbike taxis, which are prevalent in many African countries, but particularly Sierra Leone, every single one of these motorbike taxi riders had got a T-shirt saying, welcome home, Foreign Secretary Cleverly. And the school kids were lining the streets. The whole of the town had come up to greet me, and they were incredibly excited because this, as I say, the second city in a small West African country felt that, one of the offspring of their town, of their identity, was the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is a very, very important position on the global stage.
Hugely emotional.
It was, and I was choking up the whole time. I was trying to hold it together, and I, genuinely, I was struggling. But yeah, it was very moving. It was lovely, and again, one of the things that really struck me whilst we were there, we saw the impact that a small amount of investment from the UK was making in people's lives. We had invested in a forestry project where a lot of the workers were women, and to see the family dynamic change when the woman in the family was the primary breadwinner rather than the man. And the impact it had on reducing domestic violence was enormous, because the women were basically saying, you hit me again, I'm leaving and I'm taking my income with me. And that rebalanced the relationship. So an economics project, which is what it was designed initially to be, had this amazing ripple effect. And it really struck me that when we do this right, the impact that the UK can have on the world stage is absolutely enormous. And I also saw that when I went to Kyiv, when I went to Ukraine, and saw the impact of our early and decisive support to the Ukrainians in their self-defense. So whether it's a little forestry project in West Africa, or whether it is battle-winning equipment in Ukraine, the UK is making a real difference. I was incredibly proud of that.
We will come on to politics in a moment, but I thought it's important to get a bit of background about you for our listeners. So if you'd like to ask James Cleverly a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Curtain.
LBC. Text 84850.
19 minutes past 9. James Cleverley is with us. We're about to come to your calls. But let's take a text from Robbie in Chelmsford first, who says, James, you're a straight shooter and that's to be admired. In that spirit, I'd like to ask you to be straight with the audience and tell us what you really thought about the Rwanda policy. It's okay if you change your mind about it, but it's essential that you can be honest about what you thought about how we spent £300 million of taxpayers' money. Because there was this press story that before you became Home Secretary, you had described the Rwanda policy as batshit crazy.
So that's not true. And look, Yvette Cooper keeps deploying that. And
what did you call it then? If you didn't call it that,
what I said, and I said it to her, and I would prefer private conversations between senior politicians remain private, but she decides to put it in the public domain. The point I'd always made, the point I'd said at the time, and I said after I was appointed as Home Secretary, was that our seeming relentless focus on that one policy area to the exclusion of the conversations about all the other stuff we're doing was batshit crazy. That's the point I was making, because it made people think that we weren't doing anything else. And you would have heard, I'm sure you would have heard listeners call in to say, are we giving all this money to France? We haven't stopped a single boat, or we haven't done anything. Why don't we do? And the point is, our coordination work with the French was stopping, and I don't have the figures at my disposal anymore because I'm not Home Secretary anymore, but the relationship we have with France was stopping about half of the small boat launches. So that's what we were getting for our money. Our relationship with Albania cut the Albanian illegal migration down by 90%. We were deporting foreign national criminals. We were interrupting the supply of outboard motors, so those illicit outboard motors being used. The price to the smugglers had increased 500% because of the disruption work that we were doing. But we weren't talking about any of those good things. We were just talking about the one bit of the equation that hadn't worked yet.
But why weren't you? Because you were, well, at that point you were still Foreign Secretary, but you became Home Secretary, and the narrative didn't really change.
I tried to. I genuinely tried, and I did an interview with I think it was the Times, where I basically said we're doing lots of really positive things, but we're just not talking about them, which for me I think is ridiculous. And it made people think, quite understandably, but incorrectly, that we weren't achieving anything on this incredibly important file. And I found that unbelievably frustrating.
So you stand by the Rwanda policy.
We're now seeing the German government exploring a relationship with Rwanda, because there's all this
not quite in the same way, though.
Not exactly the same way, but they're exploring it. And it's interesting that just as many countries in Europe are now thinking seriously about third country asylum partnerships, just as the Labour government has turned off one that was the most progressed partnership in the world. And sadly, what we're seeing, through announcing that they were scrapping the Rwanda partnership, they sent a broadcast message to the people smugglers that the new Labour government was taking their foot off the gas when it came to border control. And unsurprisingly, we saw a massive increase in the attempted crossings, and sadly, the fact the successful crossings have increased was inevitable. But the thing that really, really frustrates me is the number of fatalities has also increased, because the people smugglers are forcing more and more and more people into the boats, and that is costing lives.
So if you win this leadership contest and there's a dramatic result of the next election and you become Prime Minister, would you be looking to reinstate some version of the... I mean, we don't know what the circumstances will be like then, but assuming that they're similar to today, would you look at reinstating it? Because Tom Tugendhat has said he would. I think Robert Jenrick has certainly said the same thing.
Well, everyone's saying it now. I've said it right from the get-go. And in fact, last time I was on air with you, we were having that debate with Yvette Cooper, and I asked her a question then. I asked her a number of times during the general election, and we've asked since they've come into government, if you don't have an agreement like the one we were the one we struck with Rwanda, where do you send failed asylum seekers who have arrived from countries like Afghanistan or Iran or Syria? And the fact is they now have a de facto amnesty for anyone arriving here from those countries, because you cannot in good conscience send them back to those places. But if there's nowhere else you can send them, they're going to have to stay here. And there are literally hundreds of millions of people living in those countries, and we can't absorb them all. So you have to have a deterrent. The National Crime Agency said you have to have a deterrent. The new border commander recruited just this week, in his first interview, said you have to have a deterrent. And yet Labour's first act in government was to tear up that relationship and scrap the deterrent. So look, what happens in a few years' time, we have no idea. Whether Rwandans would still want to do business with us after this Labour government treated them so disgustingly, arrogantly, not even having the good grace to call the Rwandan government and inform them that they were going to rip up a bilateral treaty. The Rwandans had to read about it in the British press. This is grossly unprofessional. And, I say this, and I've been criticised for saying it, but I'll say it again. There is no way the Labour government would have acted with such arrogance if this had been a partnership with a European country. The fact it was an African country, and the tone of Labour's attitude...
It's quite an accusation to throw at David Lammy, a black man himself.
Yes, it is. Yeah, well, until he explains why, it took almost a week before any British minister rang up the Rwandans and just said, just to formally let you know what we're doing.
Well, that's my first question for him when I...
Well, until he's come up with a better explanation, that's the one I'm sitting on. Everything about their language about Rwanda was really, really unpalatable.
Right, let's go to Trevor in Manchester. Trevor, good evening. What would you like to ask James?
I'd like to ask James... good evening, by the way. I'd just like to ask James... Given the ageing population, what does your incoming Tory government plan to do about the ageing population?
What do you suggest that they should do, Trevor?
Well, I wondered if it was a question of resources being changed about, or whether it was a question of immigration, or some other mixture of the two. I don't know.
It's a good question. Trevor, it's a really, really good question. And there are a couple of things tied up in that. We've slipped into a habit which I think is ultimately unsustainable, which is trying to offset an ageing population with large volumes of immigration and particularly, sadly, low-skilled immigration. The Office for Budget Responsibility have done some analysis, and it turns out that actually migration costs us as a country. It doesn't add to our economy, it actually costs us. So a couple of things. Firstly, I think the way we measure our economy has got to change. I've long felt that we should look at GDP per capita, which, basically is the average wealth of individuals within the country rather than just the total wealth of the country, because India has a bigger GDP than Switzerland, but individual Indians are much poorer than individual Swiss. So we should change how we measure our economy. Point one. Point two, we should reduce the cost of having kids. Our birth rate is falling and falling and falling because we're pricing families out of the market. Childcare ridiculously expensive because we have over-regulated it, and we then have this perverse situation where we have increased the cost of childcare. We then have to subsidise childcare using money that we take from taxes of the people that we release back into
Just remind me who's been in power for the last 14 years?
Yeah, we need to change. Yeah, look, no, but the point is, I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything was fine. We slipped into some bad habits. We did slip into some bad habits, and at this general election, we got a slap.
But why did you slip in? That's the key question here, isn't it? In that all governments are going to get things wrong.
Yeah.
But you say we slipped into bad habits. Why?
So I think one of the things that we did wrong is we stopped making the case for what I regard as fairly traditional conservative, almost philosophies, not just policies, but philosophies. So we talked about low tax, but we didn't make the case for the liberating effect of lower taxes. So whenever there was one of these choices, nudge taxes up or take a bold decision and nudge taxes down, we kept falling on the wrong side of the equation, which has left us with an excessively high tax burden. That was then amplified because of the completely correct actions that we took to protect people during COVID, but we got into some bad habits. And we got into bad habits because we didn't make the case, either to the wider public or indeed to ourselves, about why less regulation is not just good for business, it's good for consumers. Because when you have a highly regulated environment, it deters new entrants into the market, it deters competitors, big companies get lazy because they haven't got small companies nipping at their heels, and who ultimately pays the price? The people that buy products. So that's why we've got into this slower growth challenge, which goes to the point that Trevor was making. We need faster growth. We need to reduce the cost of having a family. We need to reduce the cost of getting on the housing ladder. We need to get back into being a more agile economy. And the way we do that is by making the case and getting the green light from the British voters between now and the next general election.
See, in a sense, I think there are parallels to be drawn between where we are now and where the Conservative Party was in 1974-75, where when Margaret Thatcher took over, there was 4 or 5 years of effectively having to convince the British people that capitalism was a good thing.
Yeah.
And the think tanks were a huge part of that. And I think that's where the Conservative Party has got to try and regain the sort of intellectual initiative, if you like, to explain why free markets are a good thing, why low taxes are a good thing, why a small state is a good thing. Yeah. And at the moment, it's very difficult to see who's going to do that.
Me. I'm going to do that.
Well, that's a good point to end the first half an hour and go to the news.
Thank you.
We'll come back to you in a moment with more calls, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:31. News headlines with Daryl Jackson.
At least 14 people have been killed in a second series of explosions in Lebanon, this time with walkie-talkies being detonated. The attack took place in the south of the country and the capital Beirut. The US Federal Reserve has cut interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, its first cut in more than 4 years. It comes ahead of the Bank of England's decision tomorrow. And train drivers have accepted a new pay offer, ending their strikes, which have lasted for more than 2 years. The ASLEF union says the deal is worth 15% over 3 years. LBC weather staying dry tonight with some low cloud moving in from the east for most, clearer in the far west and parts of northern Scotland, and a low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hi.
Iain Dale on LBC.
It is 9:34 on LBC. James Cleverly is here. He's one of the 4 Conservative Party leadership contenders. We have the other 2, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, hopefully with us over the course of the next week. James, when did you decide to run for leader? Because there were lots of people telling me that you weren't going to run and that it was a comparatively late decision. Take us through your thought process.
Yeah, look, I hadn't planned to run, and this is an observation, not a criticism, genuinely. I know a number of people had been thinking about and planning and doing the preparation work for a leadership bid, as we headed towards and through a general election. My view was always that I had a big job to do. I was Home Secretary. There was genuine risks to the integrity of our election. A lot of candidates, as we saw, were being intimidated. There was a real job of work to do to make sure that all the candidates, irrespective of what party they were in, were safe and the election went well, and all the other stuff that you have to deal with as Home Secretary, crime, policing, terrorism, protest, all that kind of stuff. So, look, my view was do the job you're paid to do, and that's what I did. In the last, I would say probably the last few days of the election campaign, a number of people started talking to me about being an interim leader if Rishi Sunak were to stand down immediately after the general election. There was a concern. Now, I didn't ever think he was going to do that because his sense of duty is acute. No, not acute, that's intense. A very, very strong sense of duty. So I never thought he was going to do that, but it's good to plan for the worst rather than hope for the best.
And you would have done that?
Well, it's funny because a number of people started talking about why they thought I'd be a good interim leader, and it was like, but those attributes are the same attributes you would need in a permanent leader. Good relationship across all wings of the party, known and respected by the grassroots, a good communicator, good experience at the dispatch box, good experience running big organisations, both within government and within the party. And those kind of conversations about being an interim leader kind of evolved into, well, actually, would you put yourself forward? And then the thing that really tipped it for me was my concern that if we get this wrong now, that there is a genuine risk that we are out of government for a very, very, very long time, potentially even permanently. And I love this country and this party too much to let that happen. And I think that we need to hit the ground running. Labour are messing up at a pace that even I found surprising, and I had pretty low expectations of them. But what that means is that I think people will look to the Conservative Party again sooner than we're expecting to look at us as a party of government in waiting. So we better be ready, not in 4 or 5 years' time, but pretty much straight away.
A friend of mine said that he thinks you would make a great leader of the Conservative Party in government, but he wonders about whether you'd be right to be leader of the opposition, taking the fight to Keir Starmer, sort of reinvigorating the Conservative Party membership. Can you see what he means by that?
No. I genuinely don't. Look, I mean, I look at my experience as chairman of the Conservative Party. When I was deputy chairman and chairman of the Conservative Party, we started seeing our membership going up. We got our candidate selection machine running much better than it did this time round. I've been taking the fight to Labour on their failures on immigration consistently. If you look back through my output, my media output, my social media output, yes, there's lots that I'm doing about the leadership, but there's also a big chunk of the time that I take making sure I hold Labour to account. And the simple fact of the matter is you don't get just to waltz in as Prime Minister. You don't get just to do that, but you've got to do the hard yards in opposition. You've got to get the party ready. You've got to get the party right. And I think that it would take a particular type of arrogance to say, you know what, I don't fancy doing the hard yards, rebuilding the campaigning machine of the Conservative Party, corralling the members of Parliament, holding the party to account. I don't want to do any of that. Give me a call on the eve of a general election win, and I might consider stepping in as Prime Minister at that point. It doesn't work like
deign
that.
to was the phrase that you're looking for. Right, let's take some more listeners' calls and messages. Matt says, do you think the Israeli government has now gone beyond the bounds of all legality in its vengeance with these attacks on walkie-talkies and pagers?
So I am no longer in the position where I have access to the intelligence reports and the assessments from our ambassadorial network and our intelligence agency. So I don't know. We could all speculate. So I don't know exactly what the detail of what happened there. Look, we've all seen the open source reporting. We've seen the news reporting. We have to understand that the terrorist organisations, Hezbollah, Hamas, Hezbollah, Tory, these organisations target civilians, and on the 7th of October we saw the brutal attacks on peace-loving, genuinely peace-loving, at a peace concert. The brutal attack. I've always said, when I was Foreign Secretary to the Israeli government, that they have to work within the parameters of international law.
What reaction do you get? I mean, when you sit opposite Netanyahu or the Israeli foreign minister and you say, look, guys, you need to stay within international law, I mean, do they explode?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, they always make the case that they are. And I've always said, you can't just say that you are. You need to demonstrate to the world that you are, and you take this seriously. And if there are individual breaches, if there are failures, that you deal with them. And there have been examples of where people within the chain of command have been arrested and gone through a criminal justice system after the incident with World Kitchen, for example. So I always push them on that. But as I say, look, I'm uncomfortable speculating too much because I only know what we're seeing in the press.
I mean, we can all have an opinion on whether that kind of action is justified. And I mean, the Israelis would justify it by saying, well, hang on a minute, they're chucking bombs over the border from Lebanon into Israel every day. What do you think we should do? Just sit there and take it?
Well, look, and this is the point. So we all have opinions, and I'm very conscious that as a former Foreign Secretary, former Home Secretary, I need to be careful making sure my opinions are based on fact, and that when I express opinion, it is to further what I think the UK should be looking to do, which is support a genuine, sustainable peace.
Yeah, but you're talking as if you were still Foreign Secretary.
Yeah,
you're not. You're in opposition. You're running for leader. I think people want to know: do you support Israel doing this?
So the things that I said when I was Foreign Secretary, they weren't just lines written for me by the department. This is what I absolutely believed. And I absolutely believe Israel has the right to self-defense. I absolutely believe that it is surrounded by opponents. There are people in Gaza, in Iran, in Lebanon, who are absolutely determined to eradicate the state of Israel and to eradicate Jews from the planet. And Israel absolutely has a right. I support that right. However, I have always made the case that in discharging their duty to protect themselves and their citizens, they have to abide by international law. That's what I said when I was Foreign Secretary. It's what I say now.
Paul has WhatsApp to say, James is probably the one contender I'd vote for, but I don't understand enough about his political views. One question I want to ask is what he'd do to rebuild the party and remove the ridiculous former cabinet members, which I assume he means Liz Truss.
So, look, in terms of what I believe, I'm very conscious. I'm very conscious that for the last few years in particular, I have been as well as being a government minister, I've done the job of being a spokesperson for the government under a variety of leaders, and I haven't spent the time broadcasting my own philosophy or my own ideas. This leadership campaign gives me an opportunity to do that. When it comes to former cabinet ministers, I don't know exactly who that message was referring to.
Well, I suspect it's Liz Truss, Suella Braverman. That I imagine is what they're meaning.
Well, look, my job as leader, my job would be as leader to make sure that we pull the party together, to make sure that we are relentless in our service of the British people. Anyone who subscribes to that, very much welcome as part of the team. Anyone who doesn't subscribe to that has got to ask themselves some serious questions about their motivations, because the infighting is we've been punished for that at the ballot box, and I don't intend to repeat that mistake.
Right, let's go to Cole in Torquay. Hello, Cole.
Hello there. My
What would you like to
question
ask?
for James is, I know that you've spoken about your priorities for young people like myself before. How will you ensure that students like myself, particularly those in secondary school, have a voice in the party and have a voice eventually, hopefully, in the country?
Yeah, Cole, this is a really, really, really good point. The average age. No, I'll be very careful to get the inflection point, the tipping point, where someone is more likely to vote Conservative than less likely at this last election, I think was 63 years old. That is unsustainable. As a party, we have always understood the need for aspiration and enthusiasm and positivity. When we lose those attributes, we also lose younger voters, and we also happen to lose women voters as well, both of which are people that we should be seeking to attract to the party. In terms of younger people within the party, two things. Firstly, we need some policies that attract younger people. Housing is an incredibly important part of that, not the only one, but an incredibly important part of that. And from Macmillan through Thatcher to the more modern era, we've always understood that when the Conservative Party gives people a route to home ownership, we are rewarded at the ballot box. It is the pragmatic thing to do. It is also the right thing to do. So we need to up our game on that. And with regard to young people within the party, and I've confronted some of our own members about this. It's no good saying, "Oh, we want younger people to get involved in the party," if all you do is make them sit in the corner and tell them to shut up, whilst all the greybeards hoard power. And so I've said, bring younger people into the party, listen to them. Don't exclude them from roles within the association. Don't prevent them standing for local government. Let's not have Buggins' turn and say, maybe you get to be the assistant tea maker to the to the future candidate for the parish council in 20 years' time. Let's give people a credible reason.
And how old were you when you first joined the party?
So I joined the party, I think it was in 98 or 99. So I think I was about 30 when I, if that maths is right. So I was. So I was well progressed. Look, I'd had a career in business before I started getting involved in the party. Look, I would have loved to have got involved younger. I suppose I could have got involved younger. I decided to join the party just after we got up until that point, one of our worst trouncings at a general election.
Just finally, before we go to break, votes at 16?
I think it's a bad idea. So we don't allow 16-year-olds to get tattoos. We don't allow 16-year-olds to take out mortgages. There are a lot of very, very thoughtful and clever 16-year-olds, but the internationally recognised age of maturity, as defined by the UN Charter on the Rights of a Child, is 18. Okay. I think that's the appropriate age.
Right. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:48.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
The Middle East on the brink of war tonight after another attack by Israel on Hezbollah. But if war does break out, what should Britain's role be? And should we get involved?
Ben Kentish on LBC. leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
9:51, James cleverly with me answering your questions. Sarah has messaged on WhatsApp, would James want to see a rule that the party can't change leader until a general election has taken place?
So I'm conscious there's a degree of self-interest in answering this particular question. Look, I think that we got into this weird habit of thinking that the way to solve any challenge or difficulty was to ditch the leader in the hope that something or someone better would come along. And I said each and every time, and I got pilloried when I did this, when I said I think it's a really, really bad idea ditching a party leader. I think I've been vindicated because it came up over and over again on the doorstep. People just saying, what are you guys playing at? Do you not take this seriously? Is it a bloody game for you? And I think we misunderstood how unprofessional it looked when we did we aired all our dirty laundry in public. You need to have disagreements. You need to have robust debate. You do it privately. And then once you come to a collective decision, you all pull in the same direction. And when you don't do that, you get punished at the ballot box.
Right, let's go to a phone call from Ranjit in Oldbury. Hello, Ranjit.
Hello, Ian, and welcome back. I'm glad you're better, mate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, James. My question to you, before I ask my question, I think the Tories have done well, with using people from minority communities, putting them on the front bench, so that's commendable. But my question to you, James, is, the Frank Hester row with Diane Abbott, if you was in charge, would you have handled it any different, or do you think it should have been handled better? And does Frank Hester have a role in politics?
Just to explain to some of our listeners who may not know who Frank Hester is, he's a Conservative Party donor, has donated millions of pounds, and I think he was caught on video made some racist remarks, which were unfortunate to say the least. He admitted that they were racist and apologised, and since then the Conservative Party's taken another £5 million from him.
Well, look, what he said was unacceptable. It was unacceptable, and he has apologised. And I believe the apology was
Do you know him?
Was sincere. I don't know him. I don't. I'm sure I met him. But I don't know him particularly well. And look, the point is we. In our system, we don't do state-funded political parties. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of state-funded political parties, but it does mean that parties have to fund themselves. The Labour Party has a long-standing relationship with the union movement. That gives them a degree of financial stability. The Conservative Party takes donations typically from individuals. The point is that what he said was wrong. It was absolutely right that an apology was demanded. It was absolutely right that an apology was given. And the fact is, he gave to the party because he understood what I think I understood and others understood, which is now being played out, is that we needed to protect the country from a rampant Labour government. And we are now and we were unsuccessful in that. There's no point pretending otherwise. There's an unsuccessful general election campaign. The Labour Party now have a massive majority, and what they're doing with that majority is they are basically stripping money from the most vulnerable, and they are repaying their political funders through above-inflation pay rises to members of unions.
But you fought that election with money from a man who said that Diane Abbott should be shot.
And it was what he said was crass. And it was racist.
But then surely, if the Conservative Party had any ethics, it would say it was crass, and we're not taking any more money from this gentleman.
So I don't agree that there's that necessary link. He apologised. I believe that apology is sincere. And it is absolutely right that we fought hard to try and protect the protect the country from a Labour government. The fact is, we are now seeing what Labour is doing with its power. It's got Whitehall riddled with cronies. It's above inflation pay rises to its union backers, and that was our fault because we dropped the ball, and we've got to make sure that we bounce back quickly. Because I really do worry about the direction that the Labour government is taking this country.
Right, should we finish off with some quick-fire questions? Because I know you all love quick-fire
Politicians love quick-fire questions, don't we?
Sunak or Truss?
Both. They're both good friends. They've both been really, really good to me.
One.
No, I don't.
Are you still in touch with Liz Truss?
Yeah, and Rishi as well. And Boris and David Cameron and Theresa May and John Major.
And you're all best of friends, no division at all.
Well, no, it's not about being best of friends, but the point is, so one of the arguments I'm putting forward is that we've got to bring the whole Conservative movement together. And I maintain good working relationships because these are people with experience. And if you're too arrogant to learn from people that have been through the University of Hard Knocks, then you're a bloody idiot. So, sorry, I shouldn't swear. So, yes, I talk to all my predecessors because they've all got things that I can learn from.
Say something nice about Keir Starmer.
Lovely hair. And he's an Arsenal fan. He's got a box at Arsenal. I need to...
He's got a... No, he hasn't.
They've donated him a box. Add it to the list.
Is there no end to the donations?
Apparently not. But he's now got a box at Arsenal, so maybe I should stop being so nasty to him.
I'll tell you what, that'd be a great picture, you and him together at Arsenal. Dear, oh dear. Who's the opposition politician you most admire?
So I really admire Angela Rayner. I disagree with her on so many levels. But, I mean, talk about transcend a difficult set of circumstances. I can't remember all the details, but she got pregnant very, very, very young. She left school very early, I think, as a direct result of that. And yet, through incredible graft on her part, she is now the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. If you cannot find it in your heart to respect and admire that, then I think you need to ask yourself some searching questions. As I say, I disagree with her on many, many, many things, but her personal story is quite remarkable.
Which of the other three candidates would you most like to go for a drink with? And you have to pick one. You can't say they're all terribly nice people. I love them all.
So I'd say Tom Tugendhat is one of my closest friends in politics.
So you pick him, that's fine.
So I'll pick him.
Karaoke song of choice.
Oh, good one.
And you can sing it if you want.
No, I'm not going to sing it because this is a family show and people might be eating.
You can't be any worse than a Davy.
Mama Told Me Not to Come by Three Dog Night. It's a proper belter.
Well, the mind boggles at that one.
Or the Tom Jones version. Anything by Tom Jones.
OK. James Cleverly, thank you very much indeed. See you at the conference in Birmingham the week after next. Now, thank you for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'm back tomorrow from 7. And in the final hour of tomorrow's show, we'll have question marks for you. Simon Marks will be here to take your calls on the US presidential election with fewer than 50 days to go until Americans head to the voting booths. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Richard Spur. But right now, here's Ben Kentish.
Ian, thank you very much. Hello, good evening. Coming up.
The logic of making all these devices explode is to do it as a preemptive strike before a major military operation.
After the exploding pagers yesterday, come the exploding walkie-talkies today as Israel steps up